Listen, I'm about to tell you something that goes against everything your parents taught you, everything society tells you, everything the real estate industry wants you to believe. And it's this: buying a house might be the worst financial decision you can make right now. And I know that sounds crazy. I know you've been told your whole life that renting is throwing money away, that homeownership is the American dream, that you're not a real adult until you own property. But let me tell you something. I rented for years, even after I became wealthy, even after I could afford to buy any house I wanted. And it was one of the smartest financial decisions I ever made. Nope. Now, before we dive deep into this, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, because what I'm about to share with you could save you from making a catastrophic financial mistake. This isn't just theory, this isn't just opinion, this is based on decades of investing experience, on watching thousands of people make the same mistake over and over again, on understanding the real math behind homeownership versus renting. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the conventional wisdom about real estate is dead wrong. Here's what's happening right now in 2026. Mortgage rates are sitting at 6 to 7%. Home prices are at historic highs relative to incomes. Insurance costs are skyrocketing, especially in states like Florida and California. Property taxes keep going up. Maintenance costs are through the roof. And yet, people are still rushing to buy houses because they think they're supposed to, because they think renting is wasting money, because they think homeownership is always a good investment. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not, and I'm going to prove it to you with real numbers. So let me give you my 2-question test for whether you should buy a house or rent. And this is something I've been saying for years, something I believe so strongly that I apply it to everyone who asks me for advice. Here's question number 1. Are you married? If the answer is no, rent. That's it. End of story. If you're single, you should not be buying a house, period. No? Now here's question number 2. If you're married, do you have children? If the answer is no, rent. Even if you're married, if you don't have kids yet, you should still be renting. And let me be even more specific. You should not even think about buying a house until you're planning to have at least 2 kids. That's when you need a safe, stable place to raise a family for 5 to 7 years. Now, I know what you're thinking, Kevin. That's crazy. Lots of single people own houses. Lots of married couples without kids own houses. And you're right, they do. And most of them made a terrible financial decision. Let me explain why. When you're young, particularly when you're young, the key to life is staying out of debt. And a mortgage is debt. Massive debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And when you take on that debt before you're really settled in your life, before you know where your career is going, before you know if you're going to stay in that city, before you have the stability of a family, you're making a huge bet. And most of the time that bet doesn't pay off. Here's what happens. You're 28 years old. You're single. You buy a house because you think that's what you're supposed to do. Then 2 years later, you meet someone, they live in a different city. Now you've got to sell the house, pay the realtor commission, which is 5 to 6%, pay the closing costs, pay the transfer taxes, move your stuff. And after all those transaction costs, you probably lost money, or maybe you get a job opportunity in another state, same problem, or maybe you bought more house than you can really afford, and now you're house poor. All your money is tied up in the mortgage payment and maintenance. And you can't invest, you can't save, you can't build wealth in other ways. The transaction costs alone in real estate make it one of the most expensive asset classes to trade. It's going to cost you 8 to 12% to buy and sell a property when you factor in everything. So unless you're going to stay in that house for at least 7 to 10 years, you're almost guaranteed to lose money. And when you're young and single, you don't have that kind of stability. Your life is going to change, guaranteed. So why lock yourself into a huge debt obligation when you know your situation is going to be different in a few years? Now, let me talk about something that most people don't understand about real estate, and it's the relationship between interest rates and home values. For the last 35 years, interest rates have been going down. They went from around 15% in 1981 to below 1.5% during the pandemic. And during that entire period, any asset that you bought with debt, like a house with a mortgage, appreciated in value because it kept getting cheaper to borrow money. But here's what people don't realize. So that trend is over. Interest rates aren't going down anymore. And when it costs more to borrow money to buy an asset, that asset stops going up in value the way it used to. This is basic economics, but somehow everybody forgot it. When mortgage rates were 3%, people could afford to pay higher prices for houses because their monthly payment was still manageable. But when mortgage rates are 7%, people can't afford to pay as much, so prices have to come down or at least stop rising. Back in 2018, I was warning people about this. I said someone buying a $200,000 house and assuming it would be worth $250,000 in a year, that might have been true 10 years ago, but it's not going to be true going forward. And guess what? After a brief surge during the pandemic, when rates went to zero, we're now seeing that correction play out. Home prices in many markets are falling. Inventory is building up. Homes are sitting on the market longer because the era of easy appreciation is over. A lot of people say to me, if I'm only renting, I'm not building any equity in my home. But when you buy a home, you're taking on debt. And you need to consider the changing trends in interest rates. Let me show you the real math. If you buy a $500,000 house today with 20% down, you're borrowing $400,000 at, let's say, 7% over 30 years. Your monthly payment, just for principal and interest, is about $2,660. But here's what most people don't realize. In the first 10 years of that mortgage, you're paying almost entirely interest, very little principal. In year one of that $2,660 monthly payment, about $2,333 is going to interest, and only $327 is going to principal. So you're paying $32,000 a year, and only $3,900 of it is actually building equity. The rest is just going to the bank. And people think renting is throwing money away. No, paying interest on a mortgage is throwing money away. At least when you rent, you know exactly what you're paying for. You're paying for shelter, for flexibility, for freedom. You're not pretending that you're building wealth when really you're just making the bank rich. And it gets worse because on top of that mortgage payment, you've got property taxes, which could be another $800 to $1,000 a month, depending on where you live. You've got insurance, which could be another $200 to $500 a month, especially in high-risk areas. You've got maintenance, which should be about 1% of the home's value per year, so another $400 a month. You've got HOA fees if you're in a condo or a planned community, maybe another $300 to $500 a month. Add it all up, and you're paying $4,500 to $5,500 a month to own that $500,000 house. And most of that is not building equity. Most of that is just gone. Now let me tell you what I did, and this is the part that shocks people. Even after I became wealthy, even after I sold my company for billions of dollars, I rented for years. Why? Because I understood the math. I understood that my capital could work harder for me in other investments than it could in a house. Let me explain, when I was building my first businesses, when I was growing my wealth, I didn't want hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in a house. I wanted that money liquid. I wanted it working for me. I wanted it invested in my business, in stocks, in other opportunities that could actually generate returns. If you take that 20 or 25% down payment that you would put on a house and instead invest it in bonds or stocks or your business, you can get actual returns. You can get 4%, 8%, 10%, or more depending on the investment. Here's a real example. Let's say you have $100,000 saved up You can either use that as a down payment on a $500,000 house, or you can rent a similar house for $2,500 $100 a month and invest that $100,000. If you invest it in a diversified portfolio averaging 10% returns, which is conservative for long-term stock market returns, in 30 years that $100,000 becomes $1.75 million just from that initial investment, not counting any additional contributions. But wait, it gets better, because you're also saving money every month by renting instead of owning. Remember, we calculated that owning costs about $4,500 to $5,500 a month when you factor in everything, but you can rent a similar place for $2,500 to $3,000 a month in most markets. So you're saving $2,000 to $2,500 a month. If you invest that difference every single month at 10% returns, over 30 years you accumulate an additional $4.5 to $5.6 million. So by renting instead of buying, by investing your down payment and the monthly savings, you end up with over $6 million in liquid wealth after 30 years. Meanwhile, the person who bought the house, they own a house that's probably worth maybe $800,000 to $1 million after 30 years of appreciation, but they have no other liquid wealth. All their money is tied up in that one asset, and they still have to sell it and pay transaction costs if they want to access that wealth. Who made the better decision? It's not even close. And here's another thing people don't think about. When you rent, you have flexibility, you have freedom. If you get a better job opportunity in another city, you can move, no problem. Your lease is up. You go. If the neighborhood starts to decline, you can leave. If your life situation changes, you can adjust. You're not trapped. You're not anchored to one location by hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and transaction costs. I can't tell you how many people I know who stayed in the wrong city, stayed in the wrong job, stayed in the wrong situation because they couldn't afford to sell their house, because they were underwater on their mortgage, because they couldn't deal with the transaction costs. That's not freedom. That's a prison. And people call it the American dream. I call it the American trap. If you're going to buy a house, if you've passed my 2-question test, if you're married with kids and you're really settled, then here's my rule. You've got to make sure the mortgage payment is only 1/3 of your after-tax income. If you're paying more than 1/3 of your after-tax income on housing, you bought a house that was too big and you can't afford it. Because there are a lot of other costs in life: education, clothing for your kids, food. Maybe you're leasing a car, and if you let your housing costs get more than 1/3 of your after-tax income, you'll find yourself in financial stress. And the first place that plays itself out is divorce. I've seen it happen over and over again. Couples who bought too much house, they're stressed about money constantly, they're fighting about money, and eventually the marriage falls apart. The problem is that people buy houses on mortgage payments that consume 50 to 60% of their income, and they reach a point where financial suffocation begins. The mortgage payment is only part of the liability. You've also got property taxes, utilities, insurance, maintenance, potential repairs. These expenses can easily add another 10 to 15% of your income. And here's what happens. When you're spending 60 to 70% of your income just on housing, you have no room for savings, no room for investments, no room for life changes. You can't handle an emergency. You can't invest in your retirement. You can't take advantage of opportunities. You're living paycheck to paycheck, even though you make a good income, all because you bought too much house. So stick to the 1/3 rule, calculate your after-tax income, divide it by 3. That's the maximum you should spend on your total housing costs, including mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything. And if you can't find a house in your area that fits within that budget, then don't buy. Keep renting, keep investing, build your wealth in other ways, and wait until either your income goes up or prices come down. Right? And let me be clear about something. Don't let the dream home syndrome drive your purchasing decision. Select a home based on your financial situation, not just your aspirations. I don't care if your friends bought a bigger house. I don't care if your coworkers live in a fancier neighborhood. I don't care what your parents think. Buy what you can actually afford within the 1/3 rule, or don't buy at all. So here's my advice. If you're young, if you're single, if you don't have kids yet, rent. Take the money you would have put into a down payment and invest it in a diversified portfolio, low-cost index funds, maybe some individual stocks if you know what you're doing. Maybe invest in your own business or education or skills that will increase your earning power. Take the money you save every month by renting instead of owning and invest that too. Set up automatic investments, dollar cost average into the market, build real wealth, build liquid wealth, build wealth that gives you options and flexibility and freedom, And even if you are married with kids, even if you've passed my 2-question test, still run the numbers. Make sure you're staying within the 1/3 rule. Make sure the math actually works. Compare the total cost of ownership to the cost of renting and investing the difference, and be honest with yourself about whether buying actually makes sense for your situation. And if you decide to buy small, buy something you can actually afford. Don't buy your dream home. Don't buy something you need to grow into. Buy something practical and efficient, and then take all the extra money you would have spent on a bigger house and invest it. That's how you build real wealth. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss my future videos.